Talmoana Exiles, Talkative Try here with another Path of Exile 2 video full of awesome news, updates, and more about PoE 2. These past few days have been packed with absolute gems. We're going to begin with some confirmed leagues that will be in Path of Exile 2. Some of it is old news, some of it is new news that I found out quite recently. Then we are going to do a breakdown of the ZiggyD Part 2 interview with game directors Jonathan Rogers and Mark Roberts, which was mostly centered around the campaign in Path of Exile 2, which will be unskippable, by the way, but they are doing all they can to make that campaign as unique and fun and replayable as possible. Then we are going to go further into the PoE 2 passive tree. Somebody did some programmatic analysis and we're going to look at it, even though, of course, it is not final in the slightest. We even know the number of nodes that the current PoE 2 passive tree has. Then we're going to look at a few Diablo 4 streamer thoughts about PoE 2 just for some fun, and then discuss what is next. Because everyone, we are about 70 days out from the release of Path of Exile 2's early access on November 15th, 2024. If you haven't already, book your PTO. I have 3 days booked, so a 5-day blasting session of Path of Exile 2. Hopefully, if you haven't already, go ahead, do that. Before we get into the new information, I would like to ask, please make sure if you enjoy my content, the best way to support me is to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you do so, you are going to get all the Path of Exile 2 information aggregated on this channel, in addition to a bunch of other content, including builds, fun videos, video essays, and the like once PoE 2's early access hits. Thank you so much for your support. Okay, with the confirmed leagues, right now there are essentially 4 confirmed leagues in Path of Exile 2. The first being Delirium, which was confirmed all the way back in ExileCon 2023. We know that it will be unlocked via a quest in Act 4. Then we have Ritual, which was showcased in ZiggyD's footage, and then the footage from Gamescom. That's going to be in the game too. Then we have Breach, which was actually confirmed in an article written by Polygon, wherein Jonathan Rogers, when being interviewed by this outlet, said, quote, "We're going to be reusing a lot of mechanics from Path of Exile, but they'll be refreshed and recreated. A random example of that is Breach. This is a mechanic that we introduced in the league one day, and we're going to be making the Path of Exile 2 version of that, but all of the content is new. Like, sure, we're reusing the idea of Breach, but there's new content, new bosses, all that stuff." End quote. That's absolutely phenomenal. So really, with all the leagues that they're transforming over to Path of Exile 2, we know that they are going to have not only a brand new coat of paint, but brand new content added, which is rad. And speaking of the last piece that's essentially confirmed because of how many times it has been mentioned in interviews by Jonathan Rogers between the announcement of Path of Exile 2 and now, is Delve. Every single time somebody brings up content moving from PoE 1 to PoE 2, Jonathan brings up Delve and what Delve would look like in Path of Exile 2 and how they're not just going to upend a system from PoE 1 and drop it in PoE 2. They're going to go all in, redesign it from the ground up, use the basics of it, but really reformat what it looks like in Path of Exile 2. He uses Delve. So I would go ahead and say that Delve is essentially confirmed for Path of Exile 2 eventually. They've also made the comment that they basically want to transfer 80% of the leagues over to Path of Exile 2 eventually, by the end of early access, which could last anywhere from 6 months to a year, maybe a little bit more. I'd be curious to hear in the comments below, what leagues do you think will be transferred from Path of Exile 1 to Path of Exile 2? Or more easily, what leagues are you sure will not be transferred from Path of Exile 1 to Path of Exile 2? I might make a video on the topic. That might be a little bit of fun speculation. But for now, let's move on to the ZiggyD interview. This interview, as always, was excellent. It was between ZiggyD, who is an OG Path of Exile content creator, Mark Roberts, who is the game director on Path of Exile as a whole and the awesome boss designer, and then Jonathan Rogers, who is a founder of Grinding Gear Games and the game director on Path of Exile 2. This is the second part of 2, and it focused around the campaign and changes to gems. As we've talked about the gem changes in a previous video, I'm really just gonna fly over those very briefly and link toward the other video in the description below, And we're going to focus primarily on the campaign changes because they are spicy, they are controversial, they are radical. And Grinding Your Games knows that they are taking a risk with these changes to Path of Exile 2's campaign. I say these campaign changes are radical because Path of Exile 2 is doing something that other ARPGs are afraid to do. And that's making every subsequent character play through the campaign, and they are creating hard bosses in the campaign, and they're doing something that Path of Exile 1 never dared to do, and that's have deterministic drops throughout the campaign. And as always, I highly recommend that you check out the full interview to get all the nuance. ZiggyD is an awesome interviewer. Jonathan and Mark are excellent interviewees. The link to that will be in the description below as well. Now, before we get to the summarization and my thoughts, just an overview of PoE 2's campaign. It will be 6 acts, although Jonathan has said it's basically 5.5 acts because Act 6 is half the size of all the previous acts. It takes about the same time to complete as Path of Exile 1's current campaign. It'll have about 100 areas and therefore 100 bosses. Not all the bosses are must-kill bosses. Some are optional. These optional bosses will drop special items that buff your character, giving you increases like 10% to cold resistance or plus 10 to your health or something along those lines. You will also be unlocking 3/4 of your ascendancy throughout the campaign in Acts 2, 3, and 4. Those will be big power spikes, and presumably you will be unlocking the last part of your ascendancy if it works the same as it does in PoE 1 during the end game. I shall reiterate, the campaign is not skippable in Path of Exile 2 like it might be in other games. You have to play through the full campaign on every single character, although of course, on subsequent characters in the same league, you will be able to zoom through it much quicker because you can pass down gear. One other note here, every single league has a different seed for the world map of the campaign, meaning that quests will be in different locations, bosses will be in different locations. The world map is randomized every single time, so every experience moving through the campaign on each league will be unique. Okay, I think that's a good enough rundown. Now let's talk about the new juicy information from the ZiggyD interview. We'll start out with the campaign secrets and what they're trying to do to make every run through unique. Now, they have talked about how in Path of Exile 2, they would like to place at least 2 to 3 secrets or flourishes in every single area. And we know that there's about 100 areas. So that's between 200 and 300, probably, let's go into the middle, 250 secrets across Path of Exile 2's campaign. This might be a special hidden chest, a rare monster that's essentially a unique from a further area in the game, some sort of mini hidden secret objective or quest that you can start in one area and finish in another area. A random encounter that gives you a special reward and the like, maybe including a league mechanic earlier in the game than usual. The thing that they're trying to do here is spice up the campaign and make sure every single run feels different. You're not going to be finding these every single time. Even though they will be there, they're going to be spawning in different locations. And on one playthrough, you might run into one of these unique flourishes. On the next, you might run into another, or you might run into both, or maybe all 3. They're really trying to give that sense of exploration in the campaign and make sure that you don't feel like you're playing through the same run every single time you level up a character or build a new character in a new league. They just spent about 7 years of development time building this beautiful new campaign with all these unique mechanics that's going to have better tutorialization and the like, and they are steadfast on people playing through it and not just zipping to endgame like in other ARPG titles. They think it is integral that you begin as a lowly exile and you build your way up to being that godlike individual slaughtering through hordes of enemies. A few other secrets that ZiggyD actually pointed out, not in the interview, but in some comments after the interview itself, are these chests that you can find off the beaten path that are magic or rare. You're not going to find them on the main way to the next objective, but people who explore and for players who may be a little bit behind or struggling will find these chests and they will give you big bursts of loot if you are having a super difficult time. I'm seeing them essentially as strong boxes without the monsters spawning out of them. Additionally, in the campaign, there will be some manner of deterministic drops in multiple facets. So one aspect is finding certain items in various environmental objects. So, for example, on corpses in a battlefield, you might find every single different class of weapon there. So you're not screwed over if monsters aren't randomly dropping the weapon that you need, as, say, a summoner witch. You're not getting any scepters. Or as a huntress using a spear, you're getting no spears. You'll be able to find a spear base from the battlefield, from the corpses, by clicking on them. And if you're looking through sarcophagi in a crypt or something, you'll be able to click on them and they will drop jewelry very rarely if you're not able to find any jewelry randomly off monsters. If you go explore, if you know where to look for these objects, you will be able to find them during the campaign to help with your playthrough if you're screwed over by random drops. In addition, some monsters in the campaign, usually rare monsters, are seeded to have certain important items, like uncut gems. That was the example that Jonathan and Mark kept giving. Some monsters are supposed to give you a certain level of uncut gem in the campaign to ensure that you're getting more and more skill progress. But if you miss that monster in one area, and it's not usually coded to have another monster in the next area drop that uncut gem, a monster will have that uncut gem in the next area if you missed the monster in the area before. That was very confusing. Let me reword it. If you miss monster in area A, monster in area B will then give you another chance to get the uncut gem or whatever special seeded drop we're talking about here. This, again, is meant to help players that are struggling with gearing their character. I can speak from experience here, everyone. When I played in LA for the first time, oh my goodness, I was struggling. I wasn't finding any items that fit my character. I didn't even get any jewelry. There were no upgrades. I think I was halfway through Act 1, and I didn't even have all of my gear slots filled. I had no rare items. It was super, super rough. They've added all these drops into the game, not only just to help out people who might be struggling, but because they know the game is hard, and these people that don't have crazy skill and want to go and explore will have an actual shot at progressing through the game and beating these super difficult bosses with gear. Sure, you can rely fully on skill, or you can rely on a mix of skill and awesome gear that you're finding in the campaign. They also stress the fact that in the campaign, they're using procedural area generation, but lots of people have a misconception about what procedural means. They think that it's completely randomized. That's not the case when it comes to Path of Exile. In Path of Exile, they use the help of procedural area generation to create a set of different areas so it never feels like you're playing the same tile set twice, in a row or anything. They do that and they have so many different variations, but then they also hand plop in various different encounters or set pieces or bosses or packs to make it feel like it was handcrafted. Some games just might use procedural generation to create a bunch of random areas and then just shoot them out into the game. And it feels like crap. That's not what the developers at Grinding Gear Games are doing. They are making sure every single area feels as though it was handcrafted just for you. And in these areas that are much larger than the areas in Path of Exile 1, they stress that there's more checkpoints, because lots of people have expressed the fact that, okay, if you die in an area in PoE 2's campaign, it respawns all of its monsters. While that's true, there are also a ton of checkpoints throughout these areas, before bosses, midway through, partway through, at special encounter areas, and the like. In Path of Exile 1, usually there's just a checkpoint at a boss. In Path of Exile 2, that's not the case. And these checkpoints, not only do they save your progress in the area, they also refill your flasks. And minorly talking on flasks, yes, they have basically reverted all their flask changes, and they feel like as long as you are playing properly, you will never need to go back to town to refill your flasks. If you have to do that, something is wrong with your character, your build, and you need to fix it. Two more aspects on the campaign, and both of them have to do with items. The first is loot. They boosted loot drops in the campaign drastically from the March to the June to the current build of Path of Exile 2 that I'm sure the closed beta testers are currently playing as I record this video, as ZiggyD played, as people at Gamescom played. There is far more loot, not only just regular items that you equip, but also currency items, uncut skill gems, and the like. They knew the loot was too low, they boosted it after lots of testing, and now it does feel better to many people. They're not going to get to the ridiculous levels of Path of Exile 1, but they knew that more loot needed to be in the game, especially of varying rarities. And they also boosted gold drops in the game, because gold in Path of Exile 2 acts as a deterministic way to upgrade your character. If you are not finding the specific base type that you need, whether it be a great sword or a plate piece of armor, you can always go to town to the vendor and either gamble for that specific piece of armor or just buy it outright from a vendor. They saw that people weren't getting enough gold fast enough to really make meaningful upgrades throughout the campaign as they played it, so they greatly boosted gold drops, and now people are having a much better time using gold. I can also attest to this. I played for a 4-hour stretch and a 6-hour stretch, and both times I felt like I couldn't really buy anything using gold at all. So I'm glad to hear that they have drastically upped the amount of gold that you're getting in PoE2's campaign. Overall, the campaign changes sound phenomenal. I am a pro campaign enjoyer. I still enjoy the campaign in Path of Exile 1, and I am glad that you can't skip it in Path of Exile 2 either. I think being able to skip it, going right to the end game content or open world Zergy content and the like is horrendous, and as long as there's not beleaguered cutscenes and lots of cinematics that you have to go through, playing through the campaign when you start a new character is perfectly reasonable, especially if it's an engaging experience. All right, so now let's fly through the gem changes. Some of this we did talk about in a previous video, which is in the description. First off, gems, of course, are now leveled using uncut gems. If you have a level 2 gem and you find a level 10 uncut gem, you can use that level 10 uncut gem to level your level 2 gem to level 10 or create a new level 10 gem. Additionally, you do not have levels on support gems anymore. They are just supports. And you can only use one of each support gem across your entire character across all the skill gems that you have. This means, for example, greater multiple projectile support, you can only use one instance of it on your entire character. Of course, you can use lesser multiple projectile support on a different skill, but you cannot use 2 greater multiple projectile supports. As I said long ago when we learned this will increase build diversity. Jonathan Rogers said the exact same thing because it gives them way more different ways to build out support gems and causes you to think differently about how you are building all of your other skills. You're not just going to slap the same support gems on every single skill. Additionally, for every 5 of each attribute, that gives you another slot of that type of particular gem attribute that you can use. For example, green/dexterity gems. For every 5 points of dex you have, you can use another dexterity gem. Same with strength, same with intelligence. This makes attributes a huge thing in the game again. And it's great because on the passive skill tree, all the travel nodes that are intelligence, dexterity, and strength, you can choose between the 3, and each one of them are 5 points. So at any given time, you are 1 travel node or 1 respec away from adding another specific gem type to your repertoire. Of course, you can still get attributes on your gear as well. In this interview, Jonathan Rogers went into why they made this change to leveling of gems, and it's because in Path of Exile 1, there was no real choice when you were leveling skill gems. You'd always just click, yes, level up. It was just something that you had to do, a chore. And he thought that was fundamentally unfun. So they went back to the drawing board and they said, okay, how can we make this an interesting choice? Well, now you get these items, the uncut gems, and you can either choose to use an uncut gem to level up an existing skill or choose a brand new skill to add to your arsenal of already used skills. It's a good idea, and it adds a new way to upgrade your character and really feel like you're making more choices as you level up and not just clicking a little plus button over and over and over again. On a Reddit post attached to this particular interview, somebody asked ZiggyD, may I ask what your favorite thing you learned about from the 2 videos and interviews with the developers was? And ZiggyD said, in general, it was the insights into the process and how the game's evolving, especially the focus on redesigning the bosses again and again and again to account for different playstyles. Feels like maximum effort. A specific thing was probably the subtle smart loot that can keep track of bonus things you found and populate a future encounter with a catch-up bonus if you missed something earlier. I'm excited for how stuff like that is going to result in fewer new players bouncing off the game while still keeping it challenging and deep for veterans. Wise words from ZiggyD once again, and that is one thing I didn't touch on in this recap of the campaign and skill gem changes. Every single time they add a new archetype to the game, whether that's WASD with the mercenary or redesigning a certain type of skill class with like the ranger or the warrior, they have to go through and rebalance all the bosses in the game and all the monsters in the game. And they're not just saying, oh, well, we made this change. Now it's easier for this particular archetype to take on a boss. Say, now you can move while shooting with the ranger or the huntress. Well, you can basically dismiss most of these bosses' attacks. They don't say, screw it, let's just keep moving. They go back and they redesign the boss and they make it challenging for all archetypes. And they talked about how they will continue to do this for all the other archetypes that they add into the game. We know right now they are focusing on the 8 classes that they've showcased to us already, and then they will work on the 4 remaining classes, the Templar, Marauder, Shadow, and Duelist, and add those into early access throughout the early access period. When those are added to the game, before they are added, might I say, they will be revamping or adding to the bosses to make sure that it's still challenging if you bring in new archetypes with those classes, which I'm sure they will. It is indeed maximum effort, as ZiggyD said. Once again, a massive thank you to ZiggyD for this excellent interview, and Jonathan and Mark for participating in it. He truly is my idol. I really like the way that he conducts his interviews, and it's how I aim to conduct mine as well. Now on your screen is the unfinished, in-progress version of the Path of Exile 2 skill tree that we talked about a few videos ago. Well, a user on the Path of Exile 2 subreddit, NDM5733, was able to programmatically analyze nodes and conduct some premature analysis on this little tidbit of information that we have seen officially from Gamescom footage in the background of interviews with Jonathan, and is perfectly fine for us to look at, but not draw complete conclusions from because it is unfinished. Now, we're not actually looking at what the nodes do, we're merely looking at the number of nodes and the like, so I think this, once again, is perfectly fine. Now, what do the comparisons tell us? Well, the number of small passives in the PoE2 tree is 1,835, and there's a very similar number in the Path of Exile 1 tree. Then in the PoE2 tree, the count of notables or jewel sockets is 551 versus 449 in Path of Exile 1. Then in Path of Exile 2, there are currently 16 keystones versus 46 in Path of Exile 1. Most likely because most of the keystones have not been added yet, and they will be added before early access starts, just right before or throughout the course of early access. That's probably why they are not there yet. Yes, you will note that there are jewel sockets in the Path of Exile 2 skill tree. In fact, they are large jewel sockets. That's what they are called when people hover over them. What that means, well, we will find out shortly enough. We do know cluster jewels are not supposed to be in Path of Exile 2 on launch, so it's very unlikely that they are cluster jewel sockets. Additionally, these jewel nodes are on the outskirts of the tree, meaning you will need to travel quite far away from the middle to actually get some jewels. Maybe that's meaning that jewels are supposed to be rarer and more powerful in Path of Exile 2. We'll see soon enough. I will link the analysis in the description below if you'd like to take a look at the full explanation from this crafty user. Now I'd like to briefly talk about Diablo 4 streamers and their thoughts about Path of Exile 2. 2 streamers in particular, that's Woody Joe and Anna Cake Live. So we'll start with Anna Cake Live. She gave her thoughts on her test of Path of Exile 2 during Gamescom and essentially said, all the worst fears of Path of Exile 1 purists. That Path of Exile 2 is super, super slow. It's hard to combo abilities together. There's no loot. It's just like a Dark Souls game, and that she doesn't think it will speed up. It's basically confirming all the fears, of Path of Exile 1 players as they've outlined them before. I do think that they are unfounded. As someone who's played Path of Exile 2, as someone who's seen some veteran Path of Exile players playing Path of Exile 2, and knowing what the designers are thinking for the end game itself, they want you to still feel like a god. It's supposed to feel like a sludge at the very beginning, and you're supposed to progress slowly in power. Of course, it probably felt very difficult on these demo builds at Gamescom. She was probably put at a severe disadvantage, not being able to craft her own build, not being able to choose her own gear, and the only having a play session of between 30 and 45 minutes. All those constraints probably further lead to the game not feeling as good as it would sitting on your own computer, playing at your own speed. However, unfortunately, it did seem to confirm the fears of those PoE1 purists. Then we have a spicy take from Woody Joe that he said on the Baited Connections podcast with Catmaster, Balor Mage, and Zizarin as they were talking about their experiences playing Path of Exile 2 at Gamescom. Essentially, what he said was he was surprised that Path of Exile 2's passive skill tree wasn't a bigger evolution or innovation compared to Path of Exile 1's. Now, I'm just going to linger on that for a brief moment. And then, what do you all think about that? I have to say, Path of Exile 1's skill tree is already darn awesome. Path of Exile 2's skill tree is an evolution of that from what we've seen. We have the dual weapon passive skill tree system. We see that they've removed a bunch of nodes on the tree to make it so that you use the tree to specialize instead of having a bunch of nodes that you have to take. It looks like they're doing something with jewels. They could be doing some interesting stuff with keystones. You're all starting from the middle now instead of starting from various different positions. It's obviously bigger. I don't know exactly what people might be expecting from a Path of Exile 2 skill tree evolution. Maybe it's rotatable like Wolcen. Maybe it's 3-dimensional. But given the complaints already of Path of Exile, I don't think that would serve them well. I think the Path of Exile skill tree is already intimidating enough. And I don't know if it needed another layer of complexity or depth added on top of it. I think porting over the PoE1 skill tree and then making all these minor alterations is great. They're adding complexity and depth through other systems that aren't introduced at basically, step 2 when you're progressing to level 2. Let me know in the comments below though. Do you think there are any innovations that grinding gear games could make to the skill tree from PoE1 to PoE2? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. So, my fellow exiles, what is next? Well, we don't know. I assume we're going to get information about early access in Path of Exile 2 and how we're going to access it. I still see the battles in my comments talking about how it's definitely free versus the people who are saying it's definitely not free. I feel like Grinding Gear Games should come out and clear up some information here. Additionally, we still have to learn about the Ascendancies. We have to learn about Endgame. That's going to be closer to November. But it's September. We have less than 70 days until we get our hands on Path of Exile 2. I'm counting down the days with facts of the day on Twitter. I'll probably make some fun videos here on YouTube. I have hot takes coming out from you guys, the worst takes and the best takes, and a bunch of other Path of Exile 2 videos going down the pipeline. Thank you all so much for your support. Like I said at the top of the video, if you want to support the channel, the best way to do so is to hit the like button right now and subscribe for all Path of Exile 2 news and content in the lead up to early access and beyond. I'm looking to get at all of you guys as fast as possible and just continue to build the channel. I really want to turn this into something titanic. Thank you all for your support. I'll see you in the next one. My fellow exiles, Tala Kura.